The low hum of laughter and clinking glasses echoed through the sprawling living room as the Parker Harper family celebrated another milestone. For the first time in years, Ethan and Marcus found themselves under the same roof. Ethan, the quieter and more introspective of the two, lingered near the bookshelves, his gaze drifting across the room to where Marcus stood, confidently entertaining a small group. Marcus had always been magnetic, the kind of man who commanded attention without effort. His laughter was rich, his movements deliberate. Ethan felt the familiar tug of admiration that had once been easy to dismiss as familial closeness. Now, standing in the shadow of their blended family success, it felt like something else entirely, something dangerous. Their parents' marriage 5 years ago had fused two separate worlds, creating a family that was, on the surface, harmonious. Ethan had welcomed the addition of Marcus to his life, impressed by his charisma and ease with people. But tonight, there was an unspoken energy between them, subtle but undeniable. As the evening wore on, Ethan tried to ignore the quiet pull. He busied himself with polite conversation and refilling drinks. Yet his eyes betrayed him, seeking Marcus in the crowd. He caught Marcus's gaze more than once, and each time, it lingered a second too long. The stepbrother dynamic. When their parents first married, Ethan and Marcus had been in their early 20s, old enough to sidestep the usual sibling rivalry. Marcus, 2 years older, had quickly assumed the role of the confident older stepbrother, while Ethan fell into his usual pattern of quiet observation. Over time, their relationship settled into a rhythm. Family vacations were marked by moments of camaraderie, late-night talks by campfires, and the occasional shared joke that only they understood. Yet, beneath the surface, there had always been an undercurrent of something unspoken, a tension neither dared to address. That tension resurfaced tonight as Marcus approached Ethan, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. "You look like you could use this," Marcus said, his voice low and teasing. Ethan accepted the drink, his fingers brushing against Marcus's for a fraction of a second too long. "Thanks," he murmured, his throat dry. They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the party fading into the background. Marcus leaned against the wall, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "You've changed," he said, the words simple but weighted. "How so?" Ethan asked, feigning casualness. Marcus tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You seem more sure of yourself. It suits you." Ethan felt heat rise to his face, unsure whether it was the whiskey or Marcus's words. "And you're still the same, always so sure of everything." Marcus laughed softly, the sound intimate in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Not everything," Marcus replied, his tone softer now, almost contemplative. A private moment. Later that evening, the party began to wind down. Guests filtered out, leaving behind a trail of empty glasses and crumpled napkins. Ethan retreated to the patio, seeking solace in the crisp night air. The stars above were bright, scattered across the sky like a canvas. He heard the door slide open behind him and knew, without turning, that it was Marcus. "Mind if I join you?" Marcus asked. Ethan shrugged, his voice quiet. "It's a free patio." Marcus stepped closer, his presence warm against the chill of the night. For a while, neither of them spoke, the silence between them comfortable yet charged. "You've been avoiding me," Marcus said finally, breaking the stillness. Ethan glanced at him, startled. "I'm not avoiding you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Could have fooled me. Every time I looked your way tonight, you were conveniently busy." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The truth was harder to admit than he anticipated. "You make it complicated," Ethan said at last, his voice barely audible. Marcus turned to face him fully, his expression unreadable. "Complicated how?" Ethan hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "You know how?" For a brief moment, Marcus said nothing. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached out, his fingers brushing against Ethan's arm. The touch was light but electric, sending a shiver through Ethan's body. Conflict takes root. Ethan pulled away, stepping back into the shadows. Marcus, we can't. Can't what? Marcus interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. Acknowledge what's been staring us in the face for years? Ethan shook his head, the words spilling out in a rush. You don't understand. Whatever this is, it's wrong. It's not just about us. Then what is it about? Marcus pressed, his eyes searching Ethan's face. Because all I know is that every time I'm near you, I feel something I can't ignore. And I think you feel it too. Ethan's breath hitched, his resolve crumbling under the weight of Marcus's honesty. He wanted to deny it, to dismiss the feelings as fleeting or inconsequential. But the truth sat heavy in his chest, impossible to ignore. I don't know what I feel, Ethan admitted, his voice shaking. Marcus stepped closer, his gaze steady and unwavering. Then let me make it simple for you. Ending with uncertainty. Before Ethan could respond, the patio door slid open again, and their mother's voice called out from inside. Ethan, Marcus, can you help with the cleanup? The spell between them broke, and they stepped apart, the distance between them as palpable as the tension lingering in the air. Coming, Marcus called back, his voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil that swirled between them. As Ethan followed him inside, his mind raced. He knew this wasn't over. The line had been drawn, but it had yet to be crossed. And the question that haunted him now was not if, but when. The days following the party were a blur of routine and avoidance. Ethan buried himself in work and obligations, pretending that life was normal. Yet every time his phone buzzed or a memory of Marcus flickered through his mind, his carefully constructed facade cracked. It wasn't long before Marcus reached out. A simple text, casual in tone but heavy with implication. Found Ethan late one evening. Coffee tomorrow? Just us. Ethan stared at the screen, the cursor blinking as if mocking his hesitation. His rational side screamed to ignore it, to let whatever had sparked between them fizzle out. But his fingers betrayed him, typing a quick, sure, before he could think better of it. A meeting that changes everything. The cafe was quiet when Ethan arrived, tucked into a corner of the city where anonymity was easy to find. Marcus was already there, leaning back in his chair with an air of confidence that Ethan found both irritating and irresistible. You came, Marcus said, his lips curling into a knowing smile. I figured it was easier than ignoring you, Ethan replied, sliding into the seat across from him. Marcus chuckled, his voice warm and low. You make it sound like I gave you no choice. Ethan shrugged, trying to maintain a neutral expression. What do you want, Marcus? The question hung in the air, heavier than the steam rising from their coffee cups. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table as his gaze locked onto Ethan's. Honesty, Marcus said simply. Ethan's stomach churned. He hadn't expected Marcus to be so direct, so disarmingly candid. About what? You know what? Marcus replied, his voice softer now. What's been building between us? What you're feeling? What I'm feeling? Ethan's chest tightened, his instinct to deflect colliding with the pull of Marcus's sincerity. This is insane, he muttered, looking away. Maybe, Marcus admitted, but that doesn't make it any less real. The breaking point. Their conversation shifted to safer topics, but the undercurrent of tension remained. When they finally left the cafe, Marcus insisted on walking Ethan back to his car. The streets were quiet, the soft glow of streetlights casting long shadows. As they reached Ethan's car, Marcus paused. I know you're scared, he said, his voice low. Ethan turned to face him, his heart pounding. Of course I'm scared. This isn't supposed to happen. Marcus stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the cool night air. But it is happening, Ethan, and you can keep running from it. Or you can face it. Before Ethan could respond, Marcus closed the remaining distance between them. His hand cupped Ethan's jaw, his touch both firm and gentle. Time seemed to stop as Marcus leaned in, his lips brushing against Ethan's in a kiss that was as inevitable as it was forbidden. For a moment, Ethan froze, every rational thought screaming for him to pull away. But then the weight of his resistance crumbled, and he surrendered, kissing Marcus back with a fervor that surprised them both. The world around them faded, their shared connection consuming everything else. The kiss deepened, their bodies pressing together as years of unspoken tension erupted into a single moment of undeniable truth. Aftermath of the act. When they finally broke apart, Ethan staggered back, his breath coming in short gasps. This can't happen again," he said, his voice shaking. Marcus's expression was calm, but his eyes burned with intensity. "Do you really believe that?" Ethan couldn't answer. He turned and fumbled for his car door, desperate to escape the whirlwind of emotions threatening to engulf him. As he drove away, his mind raced. The kiss had changed everything. What had once been a forbidden fantasy was now a reality he couldn't ignore. Guilt gnawed at him, the image of his partner's trusting smile flashing in his mind. But alongside the guilt was something else, something he couldn't name but couldn't deny. A quiet moment of reflection. Ethan sat alone in his apartment later that night, the room dark save for the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the window. His phone sat on the coffee table, Marcus's name staring back at him from the screen. He didn't know what to say or if he should respond at all. The rational part of him screamed to delete the message and pretend none of it had happened. But his heart, traitorous and insistent, longed to reach out. The message was simple. "You okay?" Ethan hesitated before typing back, "No, not really." The reply came almost instantly. "Can I come over?" Ethan stared at the words, his heart pounding. He knew the answer he should give, the line he should draw. But the memory of Marcus's touch, his kiss, lingered, clouding his judgment. After a long pause, he typed back, "Not tonight." He set the phone down, running a hand through his hair as he exhaled deeply. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. But for tonight, at least he could pretend he was still in control. Ending with unresolved tension, Ethan drifted to bed, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. As he lay in the dark, the echoes of Marcus's voice and touch played in his mind. Sleep eluded him, replaced by a restless yearning he couldn't shake. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. The boundary between them had been shattered. And while part of him wanted to rebuild it, another part, larger and louder, wanted to see what lay beyond. Ethan couldn't avoid Marcus forever. Days stretched into a week, and while the world around him continued as usual, his mind was a constant battlefield. Every glance at his phone or innocent question from his partner sent waves of guilt crashing over him. The kiss they shared lingered in his thoughts like a haunting melody, beautiful, forbidden, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't until a family dinner brought them together again that Ethan was forced to confront the reality of what had happened. The Harper Parker household was bustling with warmth and chatter as their parents hosted a cozy meal, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Ethan sat stiffly at the table, avoiding Marcus's gaze at all costs. But Marcus was anything but subtle. He was calm, collected, and maddeningly self-assured, making quiet, innocuous remarks that only Ethan could interpret for what they were, veiled reminders of their secret. A fleeting touch as Marcus passed him a dish sent a jolt through Ethan, and he dropped his fork, earning a curious glance from their mother. "Everything okay, Ethan?" she asked, concern softening her voice. "Yeah," Ethan mumbled, forcing a smile. "Just clumsy tonight." Marcus's smirk was subtle but unmistakable. The confrontation. Later that evening, when most of the family had dispersed and their parents retreated upstairs, Ethan lingered in the kitchen, cleaning up to avoid Marcus. He barely noticed when Marcus entered, closing the door softly behind him. "You're avoiding me again," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. Ethan froze, the plate in his hand trembling slightly. "We're at a family dinner, Marcus." Maybe act like it. I am, Marcus said, stepping closer. But we both know there's more to this than small talk and pretending nothing happened. Ethan set the plate down and turned to face him, anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. You don't get it, do you? This, whatever this is, it's ruining everything. I can't sleep. I can't think. And every time I see you, He stopped, his voice breaking. Marcus's expression softened, and he took another step forward. Every time you see me, what? Ethan looked away, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to stop wanting you. Marcus closed the remaining distance between them, his presence filling the small kitchen. Then don't. Ethan shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. It's not that simple. I have someone who trusts me, who loves me. And this isn't just about us. It's about everyone we could hurt. And what about you? Marcus asked, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. What about what you want, Ethan? You've spent your whole life doing what's expected of you. When do you get to choose for yourself? A moment of clarity. The weight of Marcus's words hung in the air, suffocating in their truth. Ethan felt the pull of temptation again, the desire to abandon the rules and give in to what his heart wanted. But alongside it was the crushing guilt of betrayal, the image of his partner's trusting eyes flashing in his mind. I can't, Ethan said finally, his voice shaking. I won't. This has to stop. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded, his eyes clouded with disappointment. If that's what you want, he said, stepping back. It's not about what I want, Ethan whispered. It's about what's right. Marcus hesitated for a moment before turning and walking toward the door. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, and looked back at Ethan. For what it's worth, I don't regret any of it. Not a second. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Ethan alone in the kitchen. Moving forward, in the days that followed, Ethan threw himself into repairing the pieces of his life that felt shattered. He was more attentive to his partner, trying to rebuild the trust he felt he had broken. But no matter how hard he tried, there was a part of him that remained hollow, a piece of himself that had been left behind in the quiet moments with Marcus. Marcus kept his distance, respecting Ethan's decision, but leaving an unspoken promise lingering in the air, that if Ethan ever changed his mind, he would be waiting. A satisfying end. One afternoon, Ethan found himself at the park, sitting alone on a bench overlooking a small pond. The air was crisp, the sound of children playing and birds chirping providing a soothing backdrop to his thoughts. He pulled out his phone, scrolling absently through messages until he landed on Marcus's name. His finger hovered over the screen for a moment before he closed the app and put the phone away. As he sat there, he realized that while the temptation of Marcus would always linger, the choice he had made was the only one he could live with. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the ache in his chest, but it gave him a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. Ethan stood, taking a deep breath as he began to walk away. Life was messy, and love even more so. But for now, he had chosen his path, and he would carry the weight of that choice for better or worse.